Are you always running out of money? Or worried that you will? Does your salary never seem to stretch far enough? Would you like to start changing that today? In The Abundant Life, Boost Your Earning Power and Make Peace with Money, the new life-changing audio program from financial and life expert Jerrold Mundis, you'll be given a clear, simple, step-by-step system that will help you free yourself from financial worries from here on in. Jerrold's program is designed to bring abundance into your life. But it's not about working overtime, taking a job you don't like, or a get-rich-quick scheme. It's a total approach to changing your relationship with money that he developed and used himself to earn more than he had in any other period of his life. He was able to pay bills and buy many of the things he wanted. He took vacations and amassed savings. But best of all, he broke free of the stress and pain of financial challenges when he came to the realization that he was what he discovered to be an under-earner. And you can break free too. As you progress through the program, you'll be shocked to discover all the ways you've been saying no to money. Under-earners evade, avoid, and deflect money, and they often don't know they are doing it. With Jerrold's program, you'll learn how to let money into your life, money that isn't borrowed and that will exceed your basic needs. You'll discover the common characteristics that indicate a problem with under-earning. You'll gain the attitude that will help you focus on solutions, not problems. You'll learn to break out of the bondage of debt. Best of all, you'll make a permanent and empowering change in your thoughts and feelings about money. A change that will produce a life of abundance. You'll liberate yourself and make peace with yourself and money. You'll expand your vision of a life you never thought possible. And now, the Nightingale Conant Corporation is very pleased to introduce you to Jerrold Mundis.
Hi, my name is Jerry Mundis. I'm happy to be here with you, and I'm looking forward to working with you over the next 6 hours of this program. Together, we're going to travel down a road that will be exciting, exhilarating, sometimes fun, sometimes challenging, and ultimately quite wonderful. This is a road that will lead you into a life of real and lasting abundance. Are you by any chance an under-earner? I am, or at least I was. These days, I don't have to act on that anymore. Let me ask you a few questions and see if any of these strike a chord with you. First, are you usually in debt? Do you have not much in the way of savings, maybe even nothing at all, and not many assets? Are you often in a financial crisis? Do you often feel stress, pain, and fear over money? Do you do a lot of unpaid work, volunteer work, charity work, or showcase work? Do you have only a vague idea of what your daily or weekly expenses are? Do you make do with clothes and possessions that are old, worn out, or insufficient? Are you certain that something will come along sooner or later to ease your financial situation? Do you fear spending money and feel resentful when you must, but sometimes you go on buying binges? Do you believe that money would solve all of your problems? If you answered yes to 2 or 3 or even more of these questions, the odds are that you're an under-earner. If you are an under-earner, this program will be invaluable to you. If you're not, you'll still find valuable material here that will help you manage your money more effectively, bring more of it in, and use it in more pleasurable ways. This is a program about prospering, about ceasing to under-earn forever. It is about entering into the abundant life. You, like me, like every other American, either have trouble meeting your bills, or you can manage them but never seem able to create savings, or you have a surplus of money and you rarely feel uncomfortable about how much you earn or save. Now, most of us fall into the first 2 categories, at least one of those first 2 categories. And millions of us do that for no apparent reason. and despite our best efforts not to. If you're such a person as I was, and as I could be again very easily if I were to forget the principles and techniques you're going to learn about here, then this program is for you. It will bring you into the abundant life, and I mean you into the abundant life. You very specifically, no matter who you are or what your life is currently like. It did that for me, and I began from a place of great debt, despair, and hopelessness around money. It has done so for thousands of people more from every walk of life imaginable, people with whom I have worked personally and in workshops and seminars I have led around the country, and hundreds of thousands of other people through my program and other work on money. Now, what do I mean by the abundant life? Here's what I mean by that as a bottom line. That you will have money in plentiful supply, in more than sufficient supply, that there will be enough of it at the very least to meet all your basic needs humanely, and some left over to spend on recreation and relaxation, and some more left over to put into savings or investments, and to increase those savings or investments on a regular basis. That's the bottom line. From there, the sky's the limit. What's more, and just as important, you will be able to create a relationship with money that is simple, comfortable, and free of stress or worry or pain. A relationship with money that is satisfying and even joyful. That's what I mean by the abundant life. And that's what I want for you, as much as I want it and as much as I have it for myself. And I guarantee that that is what you'll get if you work this program. You can do this. I will teach you how. We'll do it together, step by step. Let me tell you a little bit about my own story, about my own debts and my own under-earning and how I overcame them and came to live the abundant life myself. It was a number of years ago. I woke up one morning tens of thousands of dollars in debt. In fact, in today's dollars, it was about $95,000 in debt. That's unsecured debt, all of it. Nothing was backed up by collateral, no mortgage or car loans were in there. All of it was to banks, credit cards, friends, professionals, service providers, and people like that. At that time, I had a guaranteed income of only $350 a month from a small mortgage on a piece of property that I'd once owned and expenses of $3,000 a month. I was falling deeper into the hole at the rate of more than $2,500 a month, which is close to $4,500 in today's dollars. I was waking up every morning with ground glass in my stomach. My sense of futility and despair was enormous. My first thought was, oh no, there's another bill coming in. I didn't know what I was going to do, how I was ever going to get out of it. And in truth, I didn't think I ever would get out of it. I can't tell you the amount of pain I was in, how utterly hopeless I thought it all was. Maybe you can identify with some of that. How I'd gotten there was, I thought, due to several circumstances. The erratic nature of a freelance writer's income, a divorce, an illness, and changes in the publishing industry, which resulted in a couple of career setbacks. That's what I thought then. I think differently now, because of what I've learned, which became the material for this program. Now, let me tell you where this program comes from. Being a writer, it was natural for me to research things. So that's what I began to do. I tried to understand what was happening to me, how it had all come about, what I might be able to do about it. There wasn't really much available on personal debt in those days, believe it or not, and nothing at all on under-earning. I learned some things here, some things there. I took some from this writer, some from that thinker. I got bits from seminars I went to, pieces from workshops. I studied self-help programs. I read. I thought. I experimented, and sometimes I even fell on my face. And piece by piece, I put together the early elements of what eventually became this program and started to practice them. From that day forward, I began to enter the abundant life. Now today, I live in a pleasant, sunny duplex in Greenwich Village in New York City. All my debts have long since been paid off. I have a comfortable cushion to cover emergencies, that's unexpected expenses. I have investments. I have retirement funds. I take vacations. I live humanely, a life that is to me rich and full, a life that is an abundant life. And out of all that is where this program comes from. Now, what exactly do we mean by the word under-earn? It took me a while to come up with a definition in one sentence that satisfied all the elements and aspects of under-earning that I learned and discovered. But here it is. To under-earn is repeatedly to gain less income than you need or than would be beneficial, and usually for no apparent reason, and despite your desire to do otherwise. I'm going to repeat that. To under-earn is repeatedly to gain less income than you need or than would be beneficial, and usually for no apparent reason, and despite your desire to do otherwise. That's it in a nutshell. You can come back to this definition as often as you need to or want to. Now, we're defining the word need here in its most basic sense, an amount that's enough for you to provide yourself with food, shelter, and clothing of a decent quality on a regular basis. That's the amount of income you need. While owning a co-op on the park or buying a new car every year or having the money to pay for your daughter's medical education at Stanford might be pleasurable and even desirable, they're not needs. Now, beneficial is more open to interpretation. For our purposes, it's enough to meet those basic needs, and as we said before, with money left over for relaxation, vacations, and money left over beyond that for savings and investments. So money starts to work for you rather than only the other way around. As a threshold definition, that's what we mean by beneficial. And that, at the very least and very minimum, is what you'll get out of this program. Now, there are three types of basic under-earning: compulsive, problematic, and minor. Throw out all the psychological jargon you've heard about compulsion. Basically, a compulsion is just an act that is repeated over and over. It's motivated by an internal reason or set of reasons, usually subconscious. Some compulsions are harmless, such as arranging pens on a desk or cans on a shelf in a certain order. Generally, we think of them as no more than habits or personal preference if we think of them at all. But some aren't, like compulsive eating or compulsive under-earning. Compulsive under-earning is repeatedly to gain less income than you need or than would be beneficial, despite the negative emotional and practical consequences that follow. And it's to do that in the face of your conscious efforts or desire to do otherwise. It is, in effect, to be powerless over the repeated act of bringing in less money than you need or than would be beneficial. That's not nearly as bad as it might sound at first, and certainly did to me when I realized that that might well and probably did apply to me. I'll be providing you with some very powerful techniques here in this program that will completely neutralize this compulsion, if you happen to be a compulsive under-earner, to run your life anymore. Now, next is problematic or problem under-earning, and that's pretty much what it sounds like. The difference between that and compulsive under-earning is largely one of scale and intensity. A problem under-earner, for example, might under-earn only periodically and generally doesn't experience financial trouble and emotional pain as severely as the compulsive under-earner. Next is minor under-earning. This is under-earning that's almost irrelevant. It's something like having a little cold, something you hardly notice that doesn't bother you much. But the very fact that you've purchased this program means your under-earning probably isn't minor. You have noticed the problem, and you are bothered by it. A minor under-earner usually brings in enough to meet her needs, at least most of the time. What distinguishes her from someone who simply has a low or a modest income is a combination of two elements. First, the potential to bring in more, and second, that to do so would be significantly beneficial. It would mean, for example, that she'd be able to buy a house or have an investment portfolio, or even just to take more appealing vacations. There are two aspects to under-earning. The first is active under-earning. Active under-earning involves doing something that results in under-earning. Any action from quitting a job to setting low fees or turning down work. The possibilities are vast. For example, seeking work for which you're not qualified, making unreasonable demands on an employer or client, spending time on projects or activities that will make little or no money, incurring heavy expenses, botching a job, telling prospective clients or employers that you don't know how to do what they want to hire you for, behaving obnoxiously or offensively in the office or with clients, accepting work you know will pay you less than you need, making promises you can't fulfill, exhausting yourself during non-working hours, investing more time on a job than you're being paid to invest. Here's a classic example from my own life of active under-earning. I wrote most of my books under pseudonyms. Whenever one of those pseudonyms became famous, built a loyal readership, I killed that name and began writing under a new one. Now, I had conscious reasons for this. An elitist Flauberian attitude about the difference between art and commerce, the fact that readers want a writer to produce the same kind of book over and over again. That is, if he's an historical novelist, for example, they don't want to see him writing mysteries. The fact that a publishing house wants an exclusive on a writer and doesn't want him writing for other houses, and others. There was some truth in all of these, but the real truth, though I didn't know it then, was that changing names was almost a perfect function of my compulsion to under-earn. It is difficult, even in the best of circumstances, to establish a reputation and make a living as a writer in the United States. I put myself through the additional trial of having to do it 3 separate times, under 3 different names. Carol is another example of under-earning. Carol is a dental hygienist in Cleveland. She spent more money on her son than she could afford, and she was trying to compensate for a divorce that took the boy's father out of his life, and she had a difficult time nearly every month trying to meet the rent. She tended to quarrel with the dentist for whom she'd worked, and she'd worked in 6 different offices in the previous 10 years. She got fired from each of those, and she spent months without income, during which she went into debt before she could find another job. Now, Carol wanted to leave the field and had been trying for 2 years to get a job as a paralegal, an area in which she had no experience. This is a fine example of active under-earning. Passive under-earning involves not doing something or failing to do something that if you did would allow you to earn more money. Anything from not getting to work on time or failing to meet a deadline or neglecting to ask for help or advice. Passive under-earning is more subtle and may be more difficult to discern at first, yet there are probably as many ways to do it as there are to actively under-earn. For example, ignoring or blinding yourself to an opportunity, failing to request a raise, not knowing what your expenses are, not attempting something unless you're positive it will work, failing to fulfill responsibilities, not making sales calls, not increasing fees, waiting for something to happen that will make things better, not capitalizing on skills or abilities, not wondering if there's anything you could do to make more money, feeling that everything is fate, that there's nothing you can do to change it, and failing truly to test that belief. Here's an example of passive under-earning from my own life. As a consultant, I break writer's block for people, forever, in one 4-hour consultation. For a long time, I did this mostly by referral, by word of mouth. If you happen to run into someone who happened to know me, and if that person happened to tell you about me, and if you got my phone number, and if I happened to be home when you called, or felt I could make myself available, then I would probably do it for you. When someone suggested to me that this was a valuable service and would probably be widely desired, and that it could be a good source of income for me, and that I should advertise, it took me more than a year to bring myself to the point of being able to do that. I couldn't bear the thought of advertising, of putting my name and phone number in print, of having people call me personally, and thinking that I would have to sell myself over the phone. Finally, I did, and the response was extremely positive. But even then, it took me 4 years to raise my rates from where they were when I began to where they are now, which is nearly 7 times the original amount. Peter is a very bright guy in his early 40s who had a history of debting and a very checkered working life. He had long periods of low income interspersed with occasional periods of high income. He'd been living pretty meanly for several years, working part-time jobs and as an office temp. He was drawing unemployment and scarcely getting by when I met him. When a friend set him up for a nearly guaranteed job with a bookstore, Peter didn't even make the call. He told me he probably wouldn't make any more there than he was getting from unemployment. He said that if he took the job, he wouldn't be available for something better. He might have been right. It may not have made sense for him to take that job. But the point is, he hadn't even bothered to make the call to find out. That is passive under-earning. Where does under-earning come from? That's a question that people often ask me. Where does under-earning come from? Well, the stars, your childhood, metabolism, past lives. Who knows? I don't. Freudians would probably have one argument. Psychopharmacologists would have another. People steeped in ACA theory, that's adult children of alcoholics, would be quite certain they knew. So would a lot of astrologists who would dismiss the ACAs. Rational emotive therapists would dismiss the Freudians, the ACAs, and the astrologists. Trance channelers would have a different opinion altogether. So would New Age thinkers. And that isn't even to begin to mention the others like sociologists, multiculturalists, the Pope, or even your mother. There is probably some truth in everyone's idea, and more in ideas that we don't even suspect yet. But the point is, how I got hurt is less important than that I am hurt. If I get up in the middle of the night for a glass of water and don't turn on the light, slip on an ice cube I dropped earlier, fall over a misplaced chair, and break my leg, my problem is a broken leg, not how I broke it. In fact, knowing precisely how I broke it, the exact sequence that led to the injury won't help me a bit. My need, first, is to understand that my leg is broken, and second, to take what action I need in order to get it repaired. So where it comes from, and even how we became resigned to it, which is nearly always an unconscious process, is less important. I mean, no one ever rubbed his hands together and said, "Oh boy, I can't wait to grow up and become an under-earner." That never happened. Knowing that you are an under-earner is what is important, and knowing how to go about overcoming that, which we'll be getting to very soon. But before we do, I'd like to spend what remains of this part of the program going over with you what I have identified over the years as the 19 most common characteristics of under-earners and how they might play out in your life. This should eliminate any question you might have about whether you are or are not actually an under-earner and give us a solid foundation from which to move forward. Keep in mind that not every under-earner will display all of these characteristics, and anyone can have one or two or even a few of them without being an under-earner. But anyone who has most of them, or even just a majority, as I did, and as do literally millions of people in the United States who don't understand why they seem never able to build up savings or wealth, or even just to get ahead a bit, probably is an under-earner, and someone very likely to be headed toward increasing pain and difficulty unless he or she recognizes the problem and begins to take steps to correct it. So let's go through them now. As I go through this list, see if you can see yourself in any of these concepts. First, under-earners are usually in debt. We're talking about unsecured debt here. Maybe for tens of thousands of dollars, maybe for no more than $50 or $100. In debt to a bank or to a friend, credit card or department store debt, or back taxes you owe. It could be that you're a month behind in your rent, or that you owe money to your dentist or therapist, or simply that you're habitually late in paying your phone bill or other bills, resulting in a past due balance. All of these are debts, money you owe. The amount is not important. What is that you are in debt. Debt is debt whether it's for $50,000 or $5. What's also significant is that you are perpetually in debt. You still haven't paid off your student loan. There's always a balance on your credit card. You rarely get your bills mailed on time. You are never out of debt, and you haven't been for years. In fact, it's probably hard for you to remember the last time you didn't owe something to somebody. I have worked with people who have literally carried some amount of debt on a monthly basis for 10 years, 20 years, even 30 years and more. People go into debt for reasons not necessarily related to underearning, of course, but the fact remains that the majority of underearners are in debt in some amount or another and have been for a long time. Now, it's sometimes thought, and logically, that a high or above average income is proof against underearning, and often it is. However, while it's true that most underearners bring in a modest or low income, that is not always true. Ken, who fixes outboard motors and snowmobiles in northern Wisconsin, makes about $32,000 a year. He's not carrying any unsecured debt, he doesn't feel any special pain or pressure over his finances, and he and his family are generally happy with their lives. Ken is not an underearner. Valerie, a performance artist who lives in New York City, makes $85,000 a year, most of which goes to expenses of various kinds, travel, wardrobe, and materials. She's in constant debt and experiences frequent stress about money. Valerie is an underearner. Ken does not repeatedly bring in less money than he needs or than would be beneficial. Valerie, despite the negative emotional and practical consequences that follow, does. This was true of Joan also. Joan is a civil servant in Chicago who had not incurred any new debt in 5 years, but who was never able to get more than a week or two's expenses ahead in savings. It is true of Robert and his wife, who live in Boston, where she is a social worker and he's a software writer who once, unexpectedly, made a great deal of money, watched it drain away over several years, and then lived in painful near poverty for the next decade. And it is true of Chuck, an intelligent, multi-talented psychotherapist in Atlanta, who, though living modestly, can't afford to take his wife and children away for a week's vacation, and who defaulted on a student loan because he couldn't meet the payment schedule. There are endless others. Second, underearners have little savings, few assets. You hardly have any savings at all. You don't have any contingency fund for emergencies. One serious hit, like losing your job, a fire, or a medical emergency, would wipe you out. Month by month, practically every dollar you get in goes right back out. As a rough rule of thumb, most people need at least 3 months' living expenses set aside in a contingency fund. That's their safety net. It covers them in case of emergencies or difficult, unforeseen circumstances. Self-employed people need at least 6 months' worth of expenses. As far as assets go, you have very few, if any. You have no investment portfolio, you don't own works of art or other pieces of property, such as jewelry that could be sold for cash or used to collateralize a loan if you needed money. You probably rent your quarters. If you do own your dwelling, a house, a co-op, or a condominium, then it's likely to be your only asset, and you probably came into it more out of good fortune through a settlement, inheritance, or being a statutory tenant when the building went co-op than you did by buying it on the open market. If you did buy it on the open market, you may well have borrowed some of the down payment from a relative or a friend. And if you somehow managed to build up equity in it over the years, you've probably already taken out a second mortgage on it. Third, underearners are often in financial crisis. Now, everyone gets into a financial crisis now and then. It's nearly impossible not to. But underearners do that all the time. If you're an underearner, you often find yourself short of cash, frequently have to scramble to borrow money or to find extra work on an emergency basis. You know what past due notices look like? Creditors may be dunning you. You're usually only a paycheck or two ahead of catastrophe, of falling off the financial tightrope, of not being able to pay your bills, or of even meeting your basic needs. Sometimes you have to run to the bank to deposit your paycheck or even borrowed money in a desperate attempt to cover the checks that you have to write immediately or that you've already written. Lenore, a music teacher, was endlessly making trips to the bank to deposit one small check after another from students. Often, on the final day or two of the month, she had to rush across town between appointments in order to get her rent in at the last possible moment. Once, the third month in a row she had been this late, she was too embarrassed to appear at the realty offices in person, so she spent $15 hiring a messenger service to deliver it. It seems that something is always happening, something that demands more money than you have. A car repair, a computer breakdown, an unexpected trip, a root canal, glasses for your oldest child. You just frequently have to struggle with one kind of financial crisis or another. 4. Underearners feel pain, stress, and fear over money. Money is a subject that causes intense emotions in you, and most of them are negative. You feel pain because there's rarely enough for you to use for pleasure or for play or for a holiday. Or it comes from feeling defeated or being weary of the struggle it seems just to bring in enough money to survive on, or from the shame of making or having so little, or the belief that you'll always have to work at a job that you don't like in order just to make ends meet, or from feeling restricted or inhibited by the lack of money, maybe even from thinking about getting married or having children. I remember sitting one afternoon with a man named Leonard, an actor who felt that way, who actually broke down and cried over it. That was more than 10 years ago. Today, Leonard lives in a house in Connecticut. It's a charming old house. He's married. He has 2 daughters whom he loves dearly. They are a source of great joy for him. Leonard has already started saving for their college education. He was able to do all this because he overcame his underearning, largely by working with the concepts and techniques in this program, just as I did. The stress you might feel around money results from putting all your energy into work, with little left over for anything else. From your anger at your parents, at profiteering landlords, at the IRS, from feeling hopeless, from feeling that you're flawed or incapable. The fear is that you won't be able to pay the rent or take care of yourself or your family, that you'll become dependent on charity, that you will become a bag lady, that there will be no place to stay, nothing to eat, that you will die. Rick, who had once been a corporate speechwriter, became so paralyzed with fear by the end of his bottoming out on underearning that he could scarcely function in an income-producing way at all. He began his recuperation working as a clerk in a stationery store. He is now the executive editor of 3 technical magazines. Sheila, in the final stages of her own bottoming out, assaulted a co-worker in an outburst of rage at the network studio where she worked. Now, these cases are extreme, but they do illustrate the kind of pain, stress, and fear that underearners often come to feel. Underearners do a lot of unpaid work, volunteer work, charity work, or showcase work. You do a lot of volunteer work at your church, say, or at a local recycling center, or at a hospital, or for the March of Dimes. You give away special skills you have writing press releases, drawing up posters, sitting on panels, doing carpentry work, putting together music, or organizing logistics. You do this for schools, for arts organizations, for professional society, and other groups whose causes you support. Or you work for nothing in showcases as an actor or a performer in order, you think, to gain publicity, to be seen by people who might want you to work someplace else for money and get reviews that you hope will be useful at some later profit-making date. You do these things, you believe, because the causes are worthy, because you've been blessed with certain abilities and it's good to give back in return, because it is your moral obligation to help those in need, because you have the time anyway, so why not? Because you need the experience, and because it is a wise investment in your future, in your career. All these reasons in themselves are quite valid, and some even highly praiseworthy, and a real contribution to making the world a better place. But when you repeatedly gain less income than you need, despite the negative emotional and practical consequences that follow, then this kind of volunteerism, this kind of charity, this kind of showcasing, this expenditure of time, energy, and ability with no income in return is not truly giving or advancing your career, but simply an act of self-destruction. It is a major function of your underearning. Next, underearners often come from alcoholic or otherwise troubled families. You might have grown up in a household troubled by alcoholism or overeating or codependency or emotional distance, or even physical abuse. Ron, a New York City psychotherapist, says he's never seen a problem underearner who did not come from such a background. Karen, a financial counselor in San Francisco who has specialized in working with money disorders over the past 5 years, agrees. By and large, I do too, but not completely. Not all individuals who grew up in such a family are affected this way, and I have seen and worked with under-earners who came from family backgrounds that were much more normal than not. Nor is family income significant either. Some under-earners come from impoverished backgrounds. Others come from very privileged and wealthy backgrounds. Most originate from the very broad middle. I would say, though, that the majority of severe under-earners do come from an alcoholic or otherwise troubled background. Under-earners may resent people with money. Some under-earners resent people who have more money than they do. This resentment usually stems from envy. They want what others have, but since they don't have it or think they can't have it, they become angry at those others. A piece of graffiti I've seen in different places reads, "Solve hunger, eat the rich." Sometimes more harshly, someone has scrawled an angry, "Eat the rich," or even a very furious, "Kill the rich." Other under-earners complain bitterly about the people who make it difficult or impossible for them to get ahead. Employers, a supervisor, a banker, lawyers, politicians, even a friend or a relative who won't give them or lend them the money they need to get through a hard time or to start a business or a new career. But always the complaint is about someone who has more money than they do. The saddest thing about this is that it condemns the under-earner to keep under-earning. There is an inexorable and self-destructive logic involved in resenting or blaming people with more money than you. If they are all corrupt, greedy, and unprincipled, if they are all exploiters and thieves who ought to be taxed out of existence or shot, then how can you possibly ever allow yourself to have money? Because then you would be corrupt, greedy, and unprincipled, and you ought to be taxed out of existence or shot. You'd have to resent yourself as much as you now resent them. It's different with people who aren't under-earners, and even with some who are. What they see in people who have money is simply proof that it's possible to have money, and that therefore they themselves have an opportunity to get it. Under-earners are good at finding enablers. An enabler is someone who makes it easier for you to continue to under-earn, a relative, a friend, a business associate, even an institution. They do this by giving you money or lending it to you or allowing you to fall behind in paying a bill. Now, most enablers are well-meaning. They want to help. But all their gifts, their loans, or forbearances do is shield you from the consequences of your under-earning a little while longer. Most under-earners are very good at finding enablers. Casey is an intellectual in his mid-30s. He has a wife and a young child. Casey has worked for a kind of think tank most of his working life. This organization is very well endowed, and Casey and the handful of others on permanent staff were supported in generous style for doing research projects of their own choosing and at their own pace. They were routinely advanced money whenever they requested it. 2 years ago, when the longtime director was forced to retire and policy changed, suddenly the staff found itself held to stricter and more realistic standards. Casey, who was now being paid for what he produced rather than on some illusionary basis, discovered in a short, painful period that he was an under-earner who had been enabled most of his adult life. I myself was once so overdue on my utility bill in the days long ago when I was still incurring debt that my electricity was shut off. I called the power company. I was a writer, I told them. I worked on an electric typewriter. Those were the really old days. Without electricity, I couldn't write. Without writing, I couldn't get paid. Without getting paid, I couldn't pay them. Therefore, I needed my electricity turned back on. I successfully talked them into restoring my power that same afternoon and talked them out of the $150 deposit they had wanted to protect themselves against me being delinquent again. It would be useful here for you to draw up a list of enablers you have used yourself over the past year or two. Now, obviously, if you're in a car listening to this and you're traveling somewhere, this is not the time to do it. But you might take a moment or two just to think about a couple of these. If you're at home, please draw up this list. If you're in a car at the moment, do this mentally with just an example or two. If you're at home, get up and get a pad, or simply go to your workbook to do this. Okay? sit back down, take a breath, and relax. Okay? Good. Now write down the names of all the people and organizations over the past few years who have made it easier for you to continue to under-earn by giving or lending you money, or by extending credit to you, or by allowing you to fall behind in your bills. These might include banks, finance companies, credit cards, department stores, schools, the government, friends, relatives, acquaintances, a landlord, a business associate, doctors, dentists, other service providers, and anyone else you can think of. Pause the CD and do this list now. When you're finished, start the CD again. Welcome back. Have you completed the list? I hope you have. Good. To remind you that you're not alone and that many others have already broken the trail before you, here's what my own list looked like from the years just before I stopped incurring debt. Visa, MasterCard, American Express, Sears, Macy's, Kingston Oil Company, Rondout National Bank, Chemical Bank, New York Telephone Company, the Authors Guild, Con Edison, Penn American Center, which is a professional society, a book packager, my auto mechanic, dentist, landlord, parents, attorney, 2 literary agents, and 3 friends. Those were my own enablers. Under-earners are very good at finding enablers. Next, under-earners have only a vague idea of what their expenses are. Beyond the rent and a close guess on utilities, most under-earners cannot tell you how much they spend each month or on what. An exaggeration? How much did you spend last month? How much did you spend on clothes, on newspapers, magazines, in coffee shops, on fast food, on cabs, on entertainment, on cosmetics, dry cleaning? Harold, a carpenter, after keeping a record of every expenditure he made for 2 months, discovered that he was spending nearly $1,000 a year on containers of coffee to go from coffee shops, delicatessens, and diners. $1,000 a year in after-tax dollars. That's a big chunk of money to be ignorant about. In most cases, the money comes in, the money goes out, who knows where, and there's never quite enough. This financial fog, this cloud of unknowing, is part of the general malaise under-earners experience over their money. You remain ignorant about your money, in the dark, blind, and helpless. Next, under-earners are either workaholic or work in cycles of excess and collapse or don't want to work at all. You put in long hours at your job or profession, you work late into the night, you work on weekends. You often feel behind schedule or a sense of urgency that you can only meet a looming deadline with extra effort, that little stands between you and disaster but your willingness to keep going. Or you might drive yourself mercilessly only so long as seems necessary or while your enthusiasm is high, and then at the end collapse and be barely able to perform the minimum expected or required. Steve, for example, who sells financial instruments, will work 10 and 12 hours a day, go into his office on Saturdays and bring work home until he makes a couple of large sales with big commissions. Then for weeks and sometimes months, he'll put in no more than an hour or 2 a day, the minimum he has to in order to keep his business going, and spends most of his time sleeping, puttering, sitting in front of his computer, browsing the web, and going to movies. Or you may not want to work at all. You might be fully conscious of this and resent and resist working at anything that requires much effort or that doesn't please you completely. More commonly, you'll simply move from job to job, never satisfied, always finding fault. Or manage to get yourself fired and spend long periods unemployed, convincing yourself and others that you really are looking for a job. Or conceive of yourself as suffering from some debility that prevents you from working more than part-time at all. Terry, a window designer who came from a well-to-do family in Chicago, had never done more than minimally support herself. She was married to a musician who was also an underearner. Every few months, her family sent a sizable check to help them out. When Terry's marriage went bad and she got divorced, she was so upset she couldn't work. Her family supported her for a year while she went to therapy and studied yoga. When she did go back to work, her income was about half of what her basic expenses were, with the slack being taken up by her family. 2 years later, her ex-husband fell ill. Terry stopped working in order to nurse him full-time. Her family supported both of them. Her husband died 6 months later. Terry went into mourning. She once again felt incapable of doing any work. When she finally did feel ready, a year later, she went back to work, but not as a window designer in a field where she was experienced and at least theoretically might have been able to earn good money, but as a yoga instructor and leader of small workshops focused on grief and overcoming grief. Sometimes she didn't even earn enough in a month to cover her rent. In some form or another, your relationship to work is distorted. Underearners see the gross, not the net. You see the total figure, which is not the real figure. The real figure is what you actually get in hand to keep after taxes. If you are offered a job, for example, paying $78,000 a year, that means to you that you will be paid $1,500 a week. You won't. Depending upon where you live and deductions such as union dues or copayment of health benefits, you could well end up being paid, truly paid, only $750 a week. In practical terms, the gross is a fantasy. The discrepancy between it and the net can be enormous. In New York City, for example, where I live, a self-employed plumber reporting his 30th $1,000 of taxable income is going to pay about $610 of that in various taxes and levies. So he is not making $1,000 on the job he contracts for $1,000. He's making $390. Sometimes this failure to see the net can be more subtle. A number of years ago, before I began my own liberation from underearning, I was involved in a difficult negotiation over the advance for a book I was going to write. I knew precisely what my true bottom line was, how much I needed in order to live on while I wrote the book. Finally, the publisher met that figure, just barely, and we closed the deal. Only a week later did I discover that the publisher had been negotiating on the basis of a 3-part payment to be made over 18 months. Well, I had made my calculations based on a 2-part payment to be made over 12 months. In this case, the gross, the total of the advance, was still the same, but the effective net, the portion I would receive in 1 year, was only 2/3 of that. By not being clear about the terms and conditions of the deal, I had, in effect, seen the gross instead of the net. Underearners may think there is spiritual or political virtue in not having money. In a recent issue of a professional journal, a correspondent wrote approvingly, quote, "The real radicals are those doing the micropresses. They are radical by virtue of their intentional underinvolvement in the mainstream economy." This illustrates a particularly clever feat of magic some underearners perform. They convince themselves that the result of their underearning, the lack of money, is actually a choice, and one that is politically or spiritually virtuous. When it's political virtue they perceive, there is likely also to be a resentment against those who do have money. There may be an adversarial view of life, too. Us against them, management versus labor, exploiters over the downtrodden. To be sure, injustices do exist, and many people hold socially conscious political positions and agitate for humane economic policies who are not underearners. But if, along with this vision, you have a number of these other identifying characteristics as well, then your position is probably mostly both a justification and a function of your underearning. Chris, for example, arrived in New York at the height of the dope-smoking, anti-war, smash-the-establishment 70s. He found a home in an urban commune and went to work for a socialist newspaper. For 10 years, he lived on very little money and a lot of ideology. Finally, he grew somewhat disillusioned, a little tired of that. He got a job with a corporation as a semi-skilled worker. Not long after that, he became involved in union militancy. He now manages to pay his bills, but just barely, and he fills most of his nights with social volunteer work and evening classes at a university where he's taking a graduate degree in public health. As a gesture of solidarity with his fellow workers, whom he believes are being exploited by the company for which he works, Chris has twice refused promotions. Meanwhile, he continues to under-earn. Even more poignant is the under-earner who believes there is spiritual value in being poor. Most of these people have a close relationship with a particular religion or a history of spiritual searching. They don't normally resent others who have money, but sometimes they do feel a twinge of envy, or they wish, wistfully, that somehow they could have just a bit more. They may believe it is God's will for them not to, or even that they are being punished, and rightly, for some past transgression or fundamental defect. Or they think they need to pray more for acceptance, to learn how to be joyful in the face of lack. Many venerable spiritual traditions, at least in some of their teachings, suggest that not valuing or even rejecting money, possessions, and other things of this world can be beneficial and is perhaps even necessary to spiritual development. On the other hand, every tradition places great value on helping to eliminate poverty or the ravages of poverty from the world, which would hardly be the case if poverty were in itself ennobling or beneficial. What most people forget about St. Francis, for example, is that he was an extremely wealthy young man who renounced his family's fortune, who chose to live a mendicant's life, who exercised an option, as was and did Gautama Buddha. There is a world, perhaps even a universe of difference between voluntary renunciation and under-earning. They are not the same thing. Under-earners are proud of their ability to make do with little. You pride yourself on being tough, on being a survivor. You don't need much. You can make do. You can get by. You might see yourself as lean, mean, and smart. You know where to buy at discount, how to shop for bargains. Maybe you're working off the books and think you're beating the system, that you're a rogue, an adventurer, an existential hero. Or maybe you don't feel any of that at all, but simply under siege, pressed just to make it through another day, deprived, yearning to have more. Even in this case, though, you're still likely to be proud of your ability to get by with so little. Ted, a bike messenger, saw himself as a kind of urban pirate, zipping in and out of traffic, running lights, beating cabs to turns. He worked for cash, he hit, he ran. Most people knew him only by his first name. He lived in a rent-controlled apartment in New York that had been passed from hand to hand for money to people like himself. But sometimes his bravado failed him. Then he would either be swept up in anger or thrown into despair over the meagerness of his life. But always he would return to his rogue's pose. He liked to boast about being free of the system. Susan, a bookkeeper who had worked for the same company for 10 years, had never asked for a raise or been offered one. She lived in a fifth-floor walk-up which was furnished mostly with cast-off articles she had found on the street. She was embarrassed by her circumstances, but still she spoke with obvious pride of how resourceful she was and capable of satisfying all her needs. Under-earners believe their occupation won't allow them to make more money. You're a painter, or a writer, or a violinist, and everyone knows they can't make any money. Or you're a librarian, a chimney sweep, a university professor, or a butcher, a baker, or a candlestick maker. And everyone knows they can't make any money either. Or maybe you work on the packing line at the local cannery, and it's the only game in town. Whatever it is you do, you're convinced that it pays very little, just enough to make ends meet, and always will. And in fact, it may not be a very high-paying occupation, but that doesn't mean there aren't ways to get more income out of it, or other much higher-paying activities you could do in addition to it. It's also possible that you selected this occupation on an unconscious level as part of your under-earning. or that you remain in your one-shop town or can't find anything higher paying to do in addition to your job for the very same reason. Some underearners work in jobs or professions that pay well or even very well. In this case, they generally manage, like Valerie, the performance artist, to set conditions up so that expenses devour most of their income. Or like John, a lawyer, to force themselves out of that occupation. John, who had his degree from Yale, managed over half a dozen years to offend and alienate nearly everyone he worked with, one by one, until, with a final flamboyant gesture, he burned his last bridge behind him and left the practice of law. After drifting through various jobs, he ended up tutoring graduate students in English. Other underearners who work in high-paying occupations or professions keep themselves in the lowest income tiers of their field, or they go into civil service where they make less than they would in the private sector, or they work for low pay for nonprofit organizations, or behave in such a fashion that they're among the first to be laid off in an economic downswing and the last to be rehired. Underearners often have clothes and other possessions that are old, worn out, or insufficient. Much of what fills your life, clothes, kitchen equipment, furniture, is old, worn out, flawed, or second-rate. You may not even be aware of this, have only a vague sense of tawdriness or insufficiency. If you are aware of it, you probably think that there's nothing you can do about it at the moment, or you tell yourself that it's still serviceable, that you can still get by with it. Your closets are filled with clothes that are years out of style or that haven't fit for nearly that long. You hang on to old appliances, a clock radio whose alarm no longer works, a toaster that only toasts in one slot or whose sides heat up, burning your fingers. You have frayed towels. You sleep on a mattress that's past its day. When Elizabeth, the secretary, began to free herself from underearning, she had an accumulation of clothes in her apartment that dated back nearly 15 years to her high school years. On the other hand, you might be very aware of your possessions or throw out whatever becomes unsuitable as soon as it does become unsuitable and keep only what's good. In this case, you probably own only the minimum required. Mark, a physical trainer, had one pair of excellent dress shoes, 2 fine dress shirts, and 3 ties. That, along with a blazer and a pair of dress pants, was his entire formal wardrobe. For casual wear, he didn't have much more. He had just enough underwear to last for a week and a single set of sheets and pillowcases. When something wore out or began to malfunction and he had to replace it, he became fretful and upset. Underearners feel that eventually something will happen to make things better. You have a vague feeling that sooner or later, somehow, in some way, something will happen that will make your life better. Occasionally, that feeling might be loosely attached to the thought, well, the economy will pick up, then things will be easier. Julie, an artist and sometimes university teacher, was speaking at the height of this last recession of the difficulty she was experiencing because of it. Buyers were more cautious, schools had cut back on programs. These are hard times, she said. She was behind in her rent and she had little money beyond what she needed for food and clothing for herself and her 6-year-old son. And indeed, the economy had changed, and indeed, things were more difficult than they had been. But what Julie didn't recognize and was almost shocked by when I pointed it out to her was that her income now was only slightly less than it had been during the booming years beforehand. Her life in those flush times had been just as much of a struggle for her as it was now. So it wasn't the economy that was responsible for her lack and deprivation, it was her own underearning. Sometimes an underearner is waiting for, or wishing for, or planning on the big fix. The big fix will let him pay off all his debts and have a lot left over on top of that. At the very least, it will bring in enough to handle everything on a monthly basis and life will become easier. If this is you, you're going to get a raise, make a big sale, receive a gift from your grandmother, pick up the annual bonus, make a killing in the market, sell your stamp collection, receive an inheritance, graduate and go to work, sell the movie rights, win an insurance case, bring in an oil well. The big fix rarely arrives. If it does, it doesn't fix anything at all. The money is either already owed or somehow disappears in a year or two, and sooner or later you end up in the same place again. In my own case, a long time ago, I had been living with my wife and children on some $30,000 a year. We could get by nicely on that then, living up in the mountains. One of my novels broke out and was optioned for film, was selected by several book clubs, and sold very well. That summer I received a royalty check for $50,000. By the time I paid off all the significant debts, celebrated a bit, and undertook some renovations on the house, there wasn't much left. A year later, life was pretty much what it had been before. I was back in the cycle of borrowing and paying off, running out of money, borrowing and paying off, and running out of money again. Underearners fill their free time with endless little tasks and chores. You probably have very little time for play. There's always more to be done than time in which to do it. Often you feel that you're falling behind, or you might feel guilty that you don't accomplish enough, that the house is never really clean, the bills haven't been cleared, there's filing to do, phone calls to return, dry cleaning to drop off. Your closet needs organizing. You haven't spent enough time with the kids. The car should be brought in for an oil change. The floor ought to be washed. Behind this near ceaseless doing, generally, lies the fear that you're running out of money, that there won't be enough. It's as if, somehow, if you keep busy, if you keep accomplishing, then catastrophe will be averted, and you can make it through one more day, one more week. Edgar is a hotel reservation clerk. He has difficulty keeping relationships going. Eventually, his lack of money makes him feel worthless, or he starts to resent the fact that the woman he's seeing has more than he does. In addition to working at his job, Edgar cleans his apartment thoroughly each month, takes classes 2 nights a week, and often feels pressured by the need to study for exams or write papers. He teaches remedial reading as a volunteer and spends nearly as much time entering information about his extensive library of music into his computer as he does listening to the music. Joyce, a nurse in Philadelphia, irons all of her 3 children's clothes, including their blue jeans and T-shirts. She constantly makes small repairs or improvements in the house. She teaches Sunday school and is never comfortable sitting down to read or to watch television. A few underearners are just the opposite. They often feel lethargic or listless. They putter half-heartedly, they sleep long hours, and watch a lot of television. But most need to keep accomplishing. Underearners fear spending money and feel resentful when they must, but sometimes go on buying binges. You put off making large purchases, a refrigerator, an iPod, a television set, a suit, or even smaller ones like towels. You're intimidated by the cost. You grow anxious when you think about buying the item. You're afraid of making a mistake, getting the wrong model, or discovering later that you could have found it at a better price somewhere else. Sometimes, when you do have some money, this fear shows up as hesitation or indecisiveness. Do you really want to go to the mountains for a week? Or, yes, there seems to be enough now, but what about the fall when the kids will need new clothes for school? Maybe you shouldn't go. Maybe you should keep this money in reserve. When you have to spend, it's painful to watch your balance drop as you write out checks. Even taking money out of your wallet to pay for food, diminishing the number of bills you have in there, may upset you. But for all this fear of spending money and the resentment you may feel when you must, you sometimes go on buying binges. Suddenly, on what seems nearly an irresistible impulse, you'll leave your home on a Saturday morning, hurry to Bloomingdale's or Neiman Marcus's and buy a winter coat, one that's more expensive than you've been planning to, and then, telling yourself you deserve them, that you need them, you'll go on to buy a scarf, leather gloves, a couple of sweaters, and boots. A buying binge doesn't have to involve a lot of money, sometimes less than $100 or even less than $50. In that case, a buying binge doesn't have to involve a lot of money, sometimes less than $100 or even less than $50. In that case, it will probably involve several small items and be done with a sense of giddiness or euphoria, or soaring feelings of pride or self-love. Often a buying binge is followed by an emotional crash with feelings of guilt and self-recrimination, even self-hatred. You might return some of the items. If you do, handing them back to the clerk will probably depress you, make you feel somehow stolen from. Finally, and last, underearners believe money would cure all of their problems. You may not consciously think that money would make you taller, prettier, better able to relate to members of the opposite sex, or more talented, happier in your work, or a scholar, an officer, and a gentleman. But deep within you, at some level, you do believe it. You believe that money would do all this for you and more. Chronic underearners, at some level or another, believe money would cure all their problems. Money won't. It can't. In fact, money can't even cure underearning. But recovery from underearning can and will bring about a massive healing within you, which will eliminate a fundamental source of pain and deprivation. In turn, this healing will generate positive reverberations across the spectrum of your life. You will bring more money into your life, and you will do that without pain and without struggle. Money that is more than enough, sometimes vastly more than enough, and you will also deal more effectively with whatever other problems and concerns you may have. Did you see yourself reflected here in this, the first part of the program that you and I are working together, which will bring you into the abundant life? If you did, it's not surprising. I found myself here. So did every one of the many other underearners with whom I've worked over the past several years. And I'd lay odds that every one of the millions more who are suffering from underearning out across the country at this moment would see themselves here too. If they didn't, I'd be astonished and skeptical. This first clear look at yourself in relationship to underearning can be a shock. You might be feeling dismal or depressed or be telling yourself that it's hopeless. It isn't. In fact, just the opposite. Seeing yourself here is the best thing that could have happened. It's a quantum leap in awareness of why you have been living in pain and lack, and without such awareness, there can be no change. Regardless of how long you have been underearning or how powerfully the malady has gripped you, you can, if you work this program, free yourself from underearning forever. Emancipation won't take place overnight. There will be some improvement, and often dramatic improvement, right away. But it's a process. Some people require longer than others, but it can and will take place. So what happens in the meantime? Are you condemned to keep on underearning until you are deep into your recovery from it? No, not at all. By beginning to use the concepts, principles, and techniques that follow, which together constitute this program, The Abundant Life, you can bring your underearning to a halt right now. You can reverse your situation and begin to liberate yourself and bring more money into your life immediately. All you need to do is join me in the next session in this exciting and wonderful journey to the abundant life.